Excited to be announcing Alex and having her here at Breakpoint. This is a topic, a question that many teams have, and I think this should be a very insightful session. A bit about Alex. Alex is a passionate tester. His favorite topics are quality, agility, and humans. She's the CEO and head of quality at BREDEX. In these roles, she supports colleagues, customers, and teams on their journey to better quality, from products, process, to communication. In her previous roles, she's been responsible for enabling and growing quality. She now spends more time on nurturing a system in the company where everyone can flourish. Alex views the world through the curious eyes of a tester and loves learning new things. She shares her knowledge and experience in workshops, coaching sessions, and as a speaker at conferences. I won't take any more time. Alex, super excited to have you here. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. I'm specifically glad to be here this year. I was supposed to be here last year, and some not so nice things got in the way. So I'm really, really pleased that I got the invite back. Thank you to the team at Breakpoint for having me back. So let's look at whole team holistic quality for product, process, and people. Before I do that, I have the slide that introduces myself. The good thing is you don't need to hear much more about that because you've just had a fantastic introduction to me. Apart from all of those things that were just said, I am also a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and I enjoy living life to the max. So as you can imagine, this pandemic is really not a great deal of fun for me. I'm excited about going and running through mud and climbing trees and things. I work for a company in Braunschweig. There's about 150 of us. I have about 14 people in my testing community, and I have been there for 15, 16 years now. So the stories I tell you, some of these stories have been going on for a long time, and the level that I'm going to be at in this talk is very much, I hope that it gives you impulses and ideas. At the end, I'll get a little bit more concrete about what you can really, really take away, but I kind of want to open your mind and make you see what can be possible. It's fair to say, though, that none of these changes have happened overnight. I've been doing this for a while now, and culture change can take a while. So that's kind of a bit of the preamble to the talk. So, the agenda. I want to talk about whole team quality.
Yeah, Alex, I think you could interrupt. I think you may have, if you're meaning to share screen, you could do that. No.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that was still on, and I am sorry for that. And thank you for interrupting. Let me just get that sorted. Right. People, you would believe we did test this in advance. Hey, now you can see my screen. Okay, so, well, first of all, I'm going to go back because, now everyone can see the pictures of me climbing trees and going on roller coasters. That's fun. Okay, we'll go forwards. Thank you so very much for saying that. Anything else goes wrong, just jump in. So, let's look at the agenda. Whole team quality. WTF. A lot of people have some interesting ideas and misconceptions about that. So I'll talk about that for a little bit. Then I'm going to look at the three aspects as promised in the talk title: quality in the product, in the process, and in personal interactions, so with people. And then at the end, we're going to look at reptiles. Trust me, it's relevant. And then hopefully there will be some takeaways that are helpful to you in your roles. So, clicking, hoping that something happens. Right. I like to refer to what happens when we start talking about any kind of change, but specifically this idea of whole team quality. I like to talk about the reactions as people being panic penguins. And this is the best picture that I could find of that on the internet. And the things that people think range from, that means whole team quality means the tester does everything. We have a tester in an agile team and they are responsible for everything. Or they go the completely other way and they say, well, whole team quality means everybody is involved in quality, so we don't need a tester. I have developers having told me, please don't make me into a tester. And I have test managers coming in and saying, well, what's my job? And there's a lot of fear and pain and anger and the dark side probably when we start talking about this. I hope that I can take away a little bit of that during this talk. Panic penguins, we don't want them. Let me jump straight in and talk about quality in the product, because I think this is the area that most people are expecting from a talk like this. So it makes sense to start with it. And I am going to start with a picture that you've probably seen before. It's from Dan Ashby, and it shows us where we can do testing. And the short answer is everywhere. The answer to when is all of the time, and how often? Well, as often as we possibly can. There's a bit of process in here as well, but we'll get to that later. And I think that it's important, especially in the kind of complex world, connected world, where we are using software, where it is not just something we use at work, but we use it at home. It's connecting our lives. It's connecting our data here with our data there. Everybody has become, to some degree or other, a software user. And everybody now knows that they're allowed to have opinions about software. And we are making more complex software, which is harder to test in a test environment. A lot of the interesting things happen when it's actually released into the real environment. People are aware, people have high expectations, and we have to be aware of how many places and how many things we can be testing, that we can be doing quality assurance for, that we can be looking at quality measures to help us while we're doing these things. And if we look at this, and I ask myself in situations like this, there's a lot of testing and quality work to be done. And I ask myself, what would Buffy do? Now, I am a bit of a Buffy fan. I loved the series, and I've rewatched it a few times. And for those of you who've never seen it, the idea is that into every generation, a slayer is born. One girl in all the world, a chosen one. She alone will wield the strength and the skill to fight the vampires, the demons, and the forces of darkness. And anyone who's been a tester in a team probably goes, wow, weight of the world on my shoulders, that feels about right. I'm responsible for everything. And I don't want to give you too many spoiler alerts, but at the end of the 7th season, close your ears if you really don't want to hear this, what they do is they make it capable that anyone with the potential to be a slayer becomes a slayer. And so instead of having just one person whose sole responsibility is to save the world, we have lots of people. And I want to see the same thing in teams. There is so much to do with quality that we need everybody to be involved and responsible. However, this leads to the first question, the first facepalm question. Do we then still need testers? You've just told us that everyone has to be involved. And my answer to that is yes, because we literally, 2 slides ago, I just said how much work there is to do. And I am still fascinated when our answer to that is to think that the first thing we should do is get rid of the specialists. Testing, basically, tester is a bad job description because it sounds like all we do is test. And a lot of people think that then that just means clicking through things. There is so much more than executing tests. We're doing quality at all of the places. We're doing strategy. We're doing test analysis. We are doing test execution. We're probably doing automation. We might be doing exploration. Now we might be working with pipelines. I have examples of this later. And I think that we really need to be aware of the fact that when we talk about cross-functional teams in agile teams, we are referring to the team as a whole, not as each individual person having to be cross-functional in all the things. Another thing is, why would I want to get rid of the person whose focus it is to have an eye on quality and passion? One thing that I enjoy asking at live developer conferences is to say, okay, if you believe that you don't need a tester on the team, which one of you developers wants to go to quality conferences to learn about the newest things and spend all of your training budget on testing? Because that's what's necessary. This is a complex area too. And then I just ask myself, why IT? Like, in the airplane industry, in the food industry, in the medicine industry, we're not like, we could get away without testing. I don't understand why in IT we're so excited about the idea of just doing less of this. But that's a question for another time. So that means that we need to grow skills. And we've done various things. Like I say, these are things that have gone on over a long time. Don't worry if they haven't happened for you instantly overnight. The very first thing that I started doing was teaching developers how to do exploratory testing. And that was where some of those first things came up with, oh my God, don't make me a tester, especially if I told people that they were good at this. They were afraid I would make them a tester. And I think when I rule the world, people will be happy about being testers, but I don't rule the world yet. Interestingly enough, one of the questions that the developers asked was also, well, are you going to teach the testers to code? And it turned out that the answer to that became, yeah, we are. And we started teaching our testers to code First of all, for simple test automation. And for some of the people, and this is an interesting thing, some of the people have said, oh, I enjoy this. And now I actually have examples of testers on teams who are responsible for quality. They support everyone else in helping them with quality. And sometimes they also develop, and that's pretty damn cool. I'm not saying it's a must. If you'd have asked me 3 years ago, I'd have said they shouldn't. And I've changed my mind. Why not? If they want to and if they can, why not? I've spent a lot of time encouraging developers and testers to work together on unit tests and TDD, test-driven development. That's a whole nother talk, because I used to think that unit tests was something that basically I had no business looking into, and I didn't really want to. And since I've been working on developers with unit tests, I think that it is one of the best places for us as testers to pair with developers, because it turns out that so many of the very important decisions get made at the unit level. Things that we'd never ever talked about in the user stories. There are just such details, and having two people look at that and having one person help the other person and saying, okay, how are we going to test that? And then knowing for later layers of tests for API, for UI, and even for exploratory testing, knowing what's already been tested and what risks we still haven't checked is fantastic. And one of the ways of encouraging people to do this is to use work in progress limits and having a good definition of done, because that drives the right behavior. If we know that the definition of done includes doing exploratory testing and unit testing and various other automations, and we know that that one tester person in a normal team perhaps can't do everything anyway, and we have a work in progress limit, then we have no other choice than to say, okay, we need to do knowledge transfer. I need to be helping on this, and everyone has to be participating. That's one slide, but that took a lot of years. Don't worry if it takes time. So, yes, developers should test too. No, not only developers should automate. I definitely see a role for testers. And like I say, it depends. It depends on their qualifications. Sometimes it's helping. Sometimes it's completely writing some of the automated tests. Testers don't have to program features. They can if they want to, and they can. And everybody has something to learn. And I'll come back to this towards the end. I don't believe that the goal is to get rid of roles, but I'll come back to that at the end of the talk. That's a knowledge gap to keep you interested and awake. Okay. And I like asking the question. This is the last slide for quality in the product. Instead of talking about testing and coding and UX or anything else, how can we as a team work together to make this feature valuable? And whose input in the team or outside of the team do I need to do this? And I think that's the question that we need to be asking ourselves, and then bringing in our own specialties to help do that and help others support us in that. Okay, quality in the process. What can that look like, and where do testers help? Welcome to my life. The picture on the right, don't worry if you can't read it, because it is still in German, basically because I didn't have the time to translate it. If anyone's interested, once I do have it translated, hit me up on Twitter and I'll send out the translation. Maybe I'll even write a blog. The only thing that you really need to notice is that every time there's something written on this, it's somewhere where the tester is involved in the process in an agile team. And I see testers asking questions like, can we get this feedback faster? Have we forgotten stakeholders, or have we thought about this person? How are we going to test this? I know that that's relevant to product as well, but it's also relevant in the process, because we need to ask that question at the right time. What risks are there? What risks have changed? What risks have gone away, or new risks? What assumptions are we making? And a very important process point, because I think that it's very easy for a developer, and this is a natural human thing, that when they are working on something and they have a question, to just be like, okay, I'll answer this myself. And I think it can be very helpful to have someone else saying, hey, let's check that with the product owner, or let's make sure that we've both understood that. And for some of those questions, we could ask, do we not have a Scrum Master for that? Is quality in the process not the Scrum Master's job? And I'm kind of on this one. So often yes, but often no, because I still see and know a lot of teams that don't have a Scrum Master, because it's still intensely hard to convince customers that anything that isn't a developer is worthwhile having in the team. And that is also one of my life goals, that customers understand that this is how we do software and that they trust us to know which roles are needed and which aren't in certain team sizes or constellations. I'm definitely not dogmatic about these things. So sometimes it kind of comes down to other people in the team. And even if we do have a Scrum Master, the tester or any specialist role is the only person that looks at the whole process from exactly their specialist role. And I think that that's important because there's an element of so much of what we do in agile teams comes down to communication and noticing at the right time that we need to talk about something, and this intense networking with each other. And I can't have all of the details in my mind all of the time. So it's worth knowing which things I'm looking for. And I'm looking as a tester for anything that has to do with being quality glue, which means I'm also involved in the process. And I think as well, I want to get medical with you for a little second, because I came up with this a while ago. Quality is like back pain. Where it hurts isn't always where the injury is. And this tells you that I'm approaching 40 because I have things like back pain now, which is just great. That's sometimes if we're noticing that, a lot of errors are getting through to our last levels of tests, our exploratory tests just before release, why is that happening? Now, one of the reasons might be that our process is bad at some point. The injury is completely elsewhere. And I think it's important to be aware of that, because otherwise we might try experiments or try to change things in the wrong place. And the other thing is as well, this is just a nice thing that a lady in a workshop in Portugal said to me. She said, a test is a bit like your pancreas. You're not quite sure what it does, but you miss it if it's not there. And there's this element of being quality glue through the whole process. So whole team quality in the process looks like reducing friction. So doing ensemble programming and ensemble testing as part of a group. So for those of you who don't know, a lot of people are trying to use ensemble instead of mob, testing and programming in a group. Reducing waste, for example, through 3 or 4 amigos meetings where the product owner, a developer, the tester, and the UX professional get together, if you have a UX professional in your team, to talk about the exact things that are going to happen in a story, so that we don't write it down. We have that conversation just before we actually start developing, so that we don't start developing in the wrong direction and we realize that we have the examples we need and things like that. Reducing manual error, improving our pipelines. A lot of automation doesn't have to be the automation of tests. It can be provisioning of data. It can be doing build and deploy processes to various staging areas. Obviously, test automation is a good idea as well, but that's not the only place that we can reduce manual error. Decreasing feedback loops generally with an automated testing strategy. How quickly do we get that information, and specifically, when does the build break, for example? Does it break if the unit tests are breaking, or do we continue? Those are the kind of questions that we can be asking. Helping us to deal with risks at the correct place. So testing and production is a thing now, because so many of our production environments are so complex that we can't even build them up before we release. So asking which risks can we reasonably mitigate before production, and which risks can we only mitigate in production, and how do we deal with that? And then, of course, constant improvement. Quality within the process is always looking at how can we improve the process? Where are the risky process points? How did that look? And I see that that is very much something that that testers can bring in. Okay, and then quality in people's interactions, or in people. And Alex, really, you've already given us a load more jobs to do and things to think about. And at the same time, we're supposed to teach everyone else in the team to help us with this. Seriously, is this our problem? And for me, it's a big resounding yes. And this might come from the last few years where I've also been in management. But you may know from Jerry Weinberg, the second law of consulting, which is no matter what the problem looks like, it's always a people problem. We are complex individuals working in complex systems. None of this is simple. None of this is even complicated. Cause and effect aren't easy. They're not combinable. It's not linear. And then we as humans are sticky. Humans are sticky and difficult and frustrating and fun. And every single one of us has needs and values and feelings and triggers and the way that we prefer to be communicated with, and bad days and good days. And I think every single one of you knows that how you react to the world on a certain day can greatly depend on whether you're in a good mental place or a bad mental place, or whether that person's managed to upset you or not upset you. And I think that we don't talk about those things often enough. And then we end up being upset and sad with each other without ever even knowing. And I think, I entirely believe that conflict, lack of communication, people being a bit annoyed with each other and with the stakeholders, that will ruin anything else that you do to improve quality. I think that you can have the most fantastic automated test suites and great pipelines, but if you don't actually like working with each other, and if you hate that other person, and if you have conflict, be it explicit or explicit, that just keeps going on, that's not going to help. And of course, I'm noticing my typo on my slide. Knowledge workers, that's what we are. We work with our brains. We can only produce good output when we are healthy and happy. And so I like to think that potentially the two most important quality metrics that we can have in a team is, first of all, our own and our team's mental health. So the World Health Organization says that stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. Okay, that fact is before Corona, but nevertheless, I don't think that Corona has done our mental health much good either. And so if you're taking on too much and not protecting yourself, then you, your team, and the product will suffer. And that's not worth it for you, that's not worth it for your company, and that's not worth it for your customers either. And not a lot of you may know also about the Project Aristotle that Google did to find out what the most important factor of successful teams was. And it wasn't how good the people were. It wasn't a range of other factors. It was psychological safety. Can I be myself, make mistakes, talk openly about risk? And I think it's worth looking at those things in our teams as well, because there is the saying that a good team will be able to deal with a bad process and do good things, but a bad team in a good process still won't deliver good results. The very condensed version, and I have a whole, for some of these slides, I have whole talks. Book me, come and talk to me. But I wanted to give you impulses today. Very condensed version of dealing with humans. Assume that there is a good reason for why the person is acting like that. Again, from Jerry Weinberg, taking 3 perspectives, because we always jump to the conclusion that they're doing that because they're stupid or they don't like us or whatever. And that I have to take myself off into a corner sometimes and remind myself that I honestly believe that people do things with the best of intentions before I can have a talk with somebody, because I am also human. But if we can do that, assume there's a good reason, and then go into a conversation with an open mind, that helps a great deal. There's a kind of proviso on that. When we're talking about racism and sexism and microaggressions, then we all know that intent, just because you didn't mean to hurt someone's feelings, doesn't mean that they aren't. And that's important to remember. I'm talking here more about more generic communication. One thing that I learned, which is incredibly useful, is that there are no overreactions, only reactions in context, which means that if somebody does something weird or flips out or starts crying or gets angry, then the first question that I really need to ask myself is, what's their context? Why is that happening right now? One thing I've learned from coaching, conflict is a chance for change. So if there is something that's a conflict, then we need to talk about it, and we need to talk openly about it. Especially now that we're remote, read the room and label the room. That's a good thing from Lara Hogan. If you notice that a meeting that everyone is kind of snapping at each other and it's not going well, be the person who's brave enough to say, hey, everyone, it feels like we're not all happy with this meeting right now. That in itself is speaking about a conflict, but only then do we have the opportunity to change it. And you can only do all of this by knowing yourself, knowing what your needs, your values, your triggers, your preferred methods of communication are, and reflecting on those things, and then having the ability to observe yourself in a context and observe things that have happened instead of just your interpretations. And all of this is very, very difficult. And seriously, some of you might be thinking like, Alex, am I still in the right talk? Because I thought you were talking about quality and I'm a tester. Is this all a tester's job? I don't think so. No. I think that the whole team is responsible for upholding and improving quality in all of these aspects, not just the last one, but in all of them. I think testers guide development, and that's something that I heard from Janet Gregory, and I'm very, very grateful for that, because we help to, I don't like the idea that testers are there to find the bugs anymore or to be gatekeepers. We help to guide the development in the right direction, and we are responsible for strategy and hands-on testing. And I think that you shouldn't be surprised if your journey as a tester in a team aiming for whole team quality, that you end up talking about process and people as well. One of my testing team, the first time that she went and did some consulting in another team, she came back and said they asked me for help on improving their exploratory testing, but they actually needed the most help on communication. I'm like, welcome to the world of like IT consulting. That will often be the case. And the role might look different. I have testers who are mostly responsible for doing, they do test analysis, and in relatively agile teams, they do test analysis, and they do test data setup, and they do exploratory testing. I have testers that help with the front end and back end unit tests, that write API tests and do exploratory testing and pair with developers. And I have testers as well who help write code if that's what there is to do at that time, because they can and they want to. And I think that that's okay. Why is that okay? Well, we talked about evolution at the beginning. We need to grow people and we need to evolve. And sometimes what we have the idea of in agile teams is that we end up with this chimera. We end up with something that is like a Swiss Army knife that can do everything. And I think that's the biggest misconception. I said that on one of the earliest slides. Cross-functionality refers to the whole team and not to individual people. I don't need somebody who is just as good in front end and back end and UX and testing and data and the database. Oh, and also cloud technologies. How are we supposed to do that? I think we need to mix instead of merge. I think diversity is important, and I think that we all need to grow and learn from each other. Evolution does not give us chimeras. Evolution gives us chameleons. Evolution gives us things that, depending on the context that they are in, can slightly change their color to be better blended in, to be better a part of their environment. And I think that that's what we need to be aiming for. I still have my specialty, but I am aiming more for something that's a comb shape, and I have a picture of that. I think this comes from, and I've forgotten his surname, I think this comes from Damien. I've heard this from somebody else. We talk about T-shaping, so the idea that I have general knowledge and I have very, very deep knowledge. And then we talked about pie shaping, and the idea that is, if you take that, actually people are like combs. We have general knowledge, and we have a lot of varying depths of specific knowledge. And if you look at my comb is very, very deep for exploratory testing, about half deep for the theory of automated testing. I used to do a lot of it, but I haven't worked with some of the newer frameworks, so I'd need more practice, but I know a lot about it. I would say relatively deep for management and communication, and so on and so forth. It's even a little bit deep for programming. I'm great at programming as long as somebody else is actually writing the syntax. We need comb-shaped people with a growth mindset. People who are aware that the new skills that you get are gained by learning them, and learning by doing, and learning by courses, and learning by working with other people. That's valid for testers, and it's valid for the rest of the team as well. Okay, I promised I would give you a little bit of concrete stuff towards the end. Where to start? And I would say it's very agile, because all you need is Post-its or a Miro board or concept board or whatever it is that you're using at the moment. A skill matrix, looking at what skills the team has, looking at what skills the team needs, and then putting them alongside each other along the lines of, okay, do I know this? Can I do it myself, and can I teach it to somebody else? So 3 different things per skill and per person. And then also, how much do I like doing this? Because if you have somebody who is very skilled at doing something, but they don't want to, then you can already see there that that's a gap. Okay, where are the gaps? Work on training ourselves within the team or getting external help. And the other thing that we can do, it's kind of similar, but it has a different aim, is an expectation matrix. And this is a very good way of getting everyone on the team to say, dear team, these are the things I bring. I bring you this. I will give you exploratory testing charters. I will ask about risk. I will help the product owner to work on acceptance criteria. I will participate in four amigos meetings. I expect from developers that they do unit tests, that they ask for reviews, that they let me pair with them on unit tests. I expect that everybody in the team participates in ensemble programming once a whatever. And then you put those things together according to the roles, and you see where people say, "Oh, I didn't see that was an expectation of me." Then you can talk about it. It doesn't mean that you have to force people to do things that they don't want to, but I would much rather have the conversation about what people really don't want to do. I would much rather have that explicitly than find out when we find bugs, problems, arguments, and all of the other things that result from not having talked about that. Okay, I'm very nearly done. Last slide. I'd like you to take away the talk. The title of the talk is Whole Team Quality. And actually, if I'm fair, I don't even want to just talk about quality anymore, because quality is an aspect of value. I want the whole team, like we had on that one slide before, to be saying, how can we make this feature valuable? And what do we need to do that? That should be our aim. And every single person in the team contributes to that, whether it's the Scrum Master, whether it's the person who writes technical documentation. Value comes from creating these things together. I think that we need to aim for enabling specialists, so people who are in the team with a specialist role, who, however, make sure that other people are enabled to help them and to do those things that everybody knows about what's going on. I think we need chameleons, not chimeras. And actually, I think we need combs, but that's kind of not as cute in terms of the picture, so I still use the chameleon one. And I think that we need to be aware that everything that we do, we need to learn, we need to teach, and we need to share. Sharing my knowledge is a good thing. Being this kind of rock star syndrome that only I'm the one that can do this, I'm the hero, that is terrible for teams, specifically for agile teams, but generally anyway. And I could finish every single talk of mine with this sentence because it's true. Regardless, talking to people and communicating with people is where the actual magic happens. And you need that all through the roles, all through your teams. Thank you for listening to me. I am pleased with myself. Now I can tell you that I had 30 slides for 30 minutes and I got through them. And hopefully I didn't lose too many people by speaking quickly. So those are my slides. Thank you for listening. And now I can take questions.
Thanks, Alex. Amazing session. It's been a gold mine. I think it's been very well received in the chat. So much love for you and your love the analogies. I think we can all agree on that. Everyone loved the analogy. I particularly like the one about back pain and how to actually diagnose it and how testers are like the pancreas. So I think, guys, before we get into questions, our team has fired up a poll. Please take a second to answer that. And now we can get right into questions. A bunch of questions on how to handle different situations.
Sure.
So let's get on the road. What were the main challenges or common challenges that you've seen while implementing overall testing and quality, especially when you have the perception that the incumbent perception that testers are enemies, or or they're just sort of responsible for testing developments? Yeah.
The common challenges are exactly that. So you will have some people who say, we've never needed a tester. We've been fine without one. It's been cool. With them, I have the conversation that they have had a quality strategy, and that was probably not very sustainable. The quality strategy for teams like that can very much be, it was a stable team on a stable technology stack with a good customer. We all knew the domain. Those things alone make it easy mode for quality. It doesn't mean that no errors happen. It just means that probably not many will. And I try to make them aware that that's thin ice, because if something changes or they go into a new team, a new technology, a customer they don't know, that they don't have any kind of net, to a safety net. Then you have the people who are like, who is this? And there's this any new role that's non-development that comes into a team that's not used to working with non-development roles goes through the same phases. They're not technical enough. They don't know what we're talking about. They just block the process. Now they're just annoying us. And then at some point, after many finding allies, and I am the inventor of biscuit-driven development, take people biscuits and they will talk to you. And then your communication will be better. And this is how the world works. I am a genius in social manipulation through biscuits. Get them to help you with things. People aren't often happy to show you their stuff, but if you say, hey, can you help me with this? Then they will. And it's these little things. And then you get to the phase where they're like, we really want this person or this role in a team. So those are I think the two biggest problems, either that people don't think that they need it at all, or that people think, sure, you do your thing, but don't bother me. And there are ways through both of those. And yeah, they're both long. I've just noticed in the chat that Buffy was 24 years ago, and now I feel really old. And thank you for that person who said that.
We have another question around providing dev support around unit testing. I think a lot of times time is an issue, and it's not feasible to have these sessions within the sprint. So how do you plan for this?
Yeah, I think the practicing, especially if people haven't, I think that once you're up to speed with unit testing and TDD, that just becomes how you develop. And yes, it does slow you down for the development, but it saves you time as of the next day. And that slowing down can sometimes be very good. But if you're still practicing, the way that we've done this is to take the practicing out of the team context. One of our great developers has set up a quality dojo where it's safe to fail. You're not working. It's not just the easy calculator example. They are complicated examples, maybe not quite as complicated as your projects, but you go along to that for an hour and a half, and you get your practice on something that doesn't have to be delivered tomorrow. And then you can start slowly building that into teams. And that's how that we've been doing it.
We have a question around someone who's trying to put together a testing team for a company that hasn't had it in place before. Any tips on getting started and making the case for how testers are useful?
Yeah, and this is exactly the role that I went through. I was the first tester in our company, and we didn't even call me a tester back then because I was supposed to be doing something else, and I actually realized that what I was doing was testing, and that's a whole nother story. I would gain experience in projects, so actually go in and be in the projects. Make sure that you get your allies from the development team, the people who say, yes, I need this, these are someone I can learn from. When you started growing that team of testers who are in the company, there are two things that you really need to look out for. One of them is having a community of practice, because otherwise you as a tester, you're often in a team on your own and you're the only role. And even when the developers are lovely and friendly to you, you're still on your own. So you need that kind of, what would you do here? How would you try this? You need that community of practice. And you can't just be in, I think, is the English word ivory tower? I'm having complications with German. Yeah, there's no point in becoming the test factory that's outside of the projects. Those people need to be embedded in the projects. They need to be having their own conversations, and we need the safe space to talk to each other. And both of those things are necessary.
Awesome. Big question. How do you envision the testing role in the future?
I have a whole keynote about that. The short form is that I believe it will still be relevant, because I think that the more complex that the world becomes, the more risks we will have, and especially the more unknown risks we will have. And I believe that exploratory testing, this is one of my favorite topics in the world, exploratory testing is going to still be so important and become even more important. I think other things like getting on track with observability and testing in production and pipelines, we are going to have to be learning a lot. I don't think that you can say, oh, I'm just doing test cases now and that will exist forever. But that's never been the case for any of the roles in IT. We always have to keep learning and keep growing. If you ask me to be honest with you, in 20 years, the way we keep having the conversation of do testers need to code, do testers not need to code? I think that every kid growing up these days is going to learn to code. And at some point, that's not going to be the question anymore. But then there will be other things that we have the question of, we have to have something to argue about, right? There will be other things. But I think that we're still going to be needed. And unfortunately, I think that there will be enough people that think that we won't be. And that you can already see examples of what happens if that's not happening. You don't need to look far to find examples of, oh my God, who tested this in the current world? That's my crystal ball.
Thank you for looking into the future. So we have a couple questions on UI testing. First one, how to convince developers that end-to-end testing are not an excuse to skip their unit tests.
Yeah. And again, the way that I've gone through this is I think like many other teams, because UI tests was the thing that the testers had the most control over. So we started doing that because we needed something. And then we kind of had the developers being like, yeah, you're doing that. We don't need to do this. And I think that a lot of people go that way. We started having conversations about the fact. So two things. First of all, the conversations that some of the stuff that we are testing on the UI level could be damn unit tests. Like, I don't want to do a UI test that goes through all of my mandatory fields one after each other and check if they've gone red. Seriously, people, unit test level. And so having those conversations and making sure that the developers have to be involved in the UI automation, because this is the great thing about specifically about developers. As soon as they notice themselves that something's difficult, they'll want to find a way to do it differently. So you have to make them feel the pain. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Do you think unit testing applies to UI testing?
I think that especially in web applications, front-end unit tests are definitely becoming a thing. They don't get rid of the need for some end-to-end workflow tests. One of my colleagues had a fantastic example. Niels, you're a fantastic guy, and thank you for sharing this with me. They had a front-end unit test that tested I think it was their filter dialog that they'd written, right? They'd written a small component, and that worked. The test was green. And it was only on the end-to-end test that they found out that things were being, that the dialog was, it couldn't delete things because it was working on focus out. And the front-end unit test wasn't doing it like that. And the end-to-end unit test, the end-to-end UI test was, apologies for my mixing up of the buzzwords. But I think, yes, they are becoming a thing and we need them, especially with the ability to write your own components in web and just how responsive and interesting and easy to use we expect web frameworks to be. But I think that they don't get rid of the need for at least some end-to-end tests.
We have a question around the ratio of devs to testers, and I guess this varies from team to team. What are your thoughts on this?
Say again, sorry?
What do you think is a good ratio of number of developers to testers?
So my experience shows that if you have a team with about 2 or 3 developers, that this isn't ideal, and I hate my management self for knowing that this is an option. That you can often get away with having a half role. That becomes a lot of problem with what you're doing in 2 agile teams, but of course we all live in a situation where customers want to pay for people in teams as well. I would prefer to have a full tester, but I see a lot of projects where in a very, very small team, you might have half. Anything between 4 and I'd say 8, I definitely want a full person. We have an example of a team that has, it's too big a team, but they decide to stay this big. They don't want to split off. So that's what they're doing because they're an agile and self-empowered Scrum team. They have 1, and that would probably be too few. However, and this is context, right? This person is incredibly experienced as a tester and as an agile tester, and it's a bit of a crack team because we have some of our best test-obsessed developers in there as well. So the great answer that's always forbidden is it depends, but those are kind of my things, that between 2 and 3, you can maybe get away with having a half role, depending on what that looks like, but that brings problems. And for anything up to 8, if you're doing it right, 1 person is enough. And above that, it's going to depend highly on what kind of a team it is.
Awesome. We can take a couple more questions before we wrap up. We have a question around advice on career paths. is it better to for a QA to choose a path in automation or manual testing, or should they focus on one area?
That's very hard for me. So my honest answer is that I expect from the testers in my team, who I'm responsible for in terms of their growth and development, to have a bit of both. There will be some people who are more involved in the automation. They really do that, but I still expect them to be able to do exploratory testing and to be aware of what whole team quality means and enablement and things like that. And there are people who mostly do the enablement, the whole team quality, and the exploratory testing, creating data, those kind of things. And they still have to be able to do some coding and to be able to do some automation. So for me, maybe that will change, right? Crystal ball at the moment, especially for like web and cloud applications, I don't yet see that I will have a front-end tester and a back-end tester. That might change though. That might be because we're still fighting in some areas just to be taken on as testers at all. But I expect a bit of, for me, that's comb shaping. I don't have to be able to set up a complete Selenium framework all on my own, but I do need to be able to find the people and work with them within my team to be able to do that, and then use examples if I have an example that I can adapt that. A bit of both. And it doesn't have to be alone. It can be with help, but for me, the last thing I need is someone that says, I can't and won't do anything with automation. I can't use those people.
Question on writing feature specifications. Who should be responsible for it?
I don't care, as long as the team does it. I like the idea of doing that in pairing. I like the idea of a tester doing that and getting feedback from a developer. I like the idea of, depending on what day of the week it is and who feels like it, needs done. We need to know what standards we're using and how we do that within the team. We need reviews, but otherwise, if it gets done, I don't care.
Awesome, interesting answer. Question on CC. Who should document scenarios that can be expected on the CCR card? Is it the business analyst or the developer? The reason is because by the time the tester is testing, they realize most scenarios are not coded.
Yeah. CCR card is a new term for me.
Yeah, likewise. Okay,
I'm going to assume it's the user story or something similar for now, unless somebody tells me something else. Who's responsible for documenting those? So for me, documentation is the thing that happens after we've had a conversation and have gained shared understanding, and it's a reminder to potentially have other conversations. So I think that if we're noticing that somebody's documenting something and then there's a handover and then the things are old, I wouldn't say whose job is it to document it. I would say, who do we need to be talking to at what time to make sure that we have the right examples? And then we can write them down. I'm not against writing things down. I spent 8 years being a product owner as well, and nothing, I'm going to not swear, nothing annoys me more than spending a long time writing stuff down only to find out, like, literally 3 minutes later that the plan has changed. I hate waste. I don't need that. None of us have time for that. I'd rather have the conversations.
Awesome. We are out of time for questions, guys. There were, I think, a few questions that were not covered. Alex, if you could check the chat and address some of those, that would be great. Or you can also
I'll stick in the chat for a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having me back, even though I had to cancel at short notice last year.
Absolutely. Love to have you back again. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.